All acts of taking are equally evil. We take from the moment we are dropped into life. We take from those around us, even our own blood. We butcher, eradicate, and take as long as we live. Life is a continuous commission of sins. Life is evil itself. I recognize I am evil. You are too. Now come kill me, and I shall do the same. Something about this old man strikes me harder than most in anime, and I think it stems from the truth that, despite how much you love him, how much good he does for everybody who's willing to accept his help, and the overwhelming level of kindness he displays in such a cruel world, Yoshimura is a man who has done very evil and despicable things. In this video, I intend to speak about this character and share a lot of my thoughts on Yoshimura and why I've come to find him endlessly compelling. With that said, let's get into it. Yoshimura is the owner of the cafe Anteku, which is the setting that Tokyo Ghoul initially revolves around. He operates this cafe as a safe haven for ghouls who simply want to lead a peaceful life and nothing more. He'll even provide them with jobs if they need a place to stay or just anything in general. Not only this, but Yoshimura at this time of the story was easily the second most powerful ghoul alive, and most powerful ghouls were aware of his presence as the owner of the cafe and his intentions behind it, which is why whenever anything would happen to those affiliated with the cafe, they would make sure that he was not present. Yoshimura kept the 20th ward a relatively safe area for both ghouls and humans, thanks to Anteku. We'd first meet Yoshimura when Kaneki would be struggling with understanding ghoul life and begging for Toka's help, and she'd refuse. Yoshimura would interject by immediately showing empathy for Kaneki and choosing to help him by giving him some food, which was human meat. From there on, Kaneki doesn't eat the food, gets into a scuffle with Nishiki, and ends up back at the cafe due to him losing control of his hunger and putting his best friend at risk. This is where Yoshimura lectures Kaneki about his refusal to eat the food that was given to him, explaining to Kaneki that he's putting himself and others at risk when he chooses to deny himself of what he is. He asks Kaneki to no longer do this, but to accept that he's now a ghoul. Not only this, but a ghoul and a human. Someone with a unique place in this world with the ability to understand both sides. From here on out, Yoshimura takes a mentor role over Kaneki like he has with many other ghouls, and attempts to push him in certain situations and gently nudge him in others. I think the best demonstration of Yoshimura's mentorship over Kaneki is when Kaneki would want to go help Toka after she's been hurt by the investigators in chapter 18. Anteku getting involved with any doves is forbidden to Yoshimura, as it can cause them unnecessary problems and it goes against their way of living, so he forbids Kaneki from helping Toka and basically wants her to suffer the consequences of her actions. But Kaneki here refuses to listen, saying that Yoshimura is saying what he's saying only because of his own experiences, but Kaneki believes that he should be able to see the world for himself and decide what to do himself. And this actually makes Yoshimura quite happy to hear. It shows a lot about his character, how far he's willing to go to protect the people he can, how he raises the people around him, how open-minded he can be despite his experiences, and more. It's a strong, yet very short moment. Now that I brought that up, I think it's time to speak of Yoshimura's past, and why I think that majority of his peaceful actions may not have been as helpful as we'd like to think. Yoshimura many years ago was an all-powerful ghoul that went by the name of Kuzen. He would eat countless humans in order to survive and slaughter his own kind to protect himself. All he wanted was a peaceful life. But when you take as many lives as he does, word is bound to go around. This is when he'd be approached by a secret organization as referred to as V. They'd offer him a role as a cleaner in exchange for providing him with an easy life. Despite getting what he's always wanted, life felt empty. It felt this way until he would meet a human woman named Ukina. They loved each other to a point where Ukina would accept Kuzen despite finding out that he was a ghoul, and not only this, she'd bear his child and consume human flesh in order to sustain it. Life was good for the two until Kuzen would find her notebook containing journalism of her pursuit toward the secret organization V, and then finding out about Ukina and Kuzen's relationship. Remember, Ukina and Kuzen were completely unaware of each other's positions the entire time. Eventually, V would force Kuzen to take Ukina's life, and her final words to him would be, "I worry about you being alone." Once Kuzen would leave the organization due to his actions, he would take Ukina and his own child and leave it in the 24th ward along with a notebook containing his and Ukina's history, and after some time, he would come to know the existence of a ghoul that hated the world, the Owl. He instantly knew that this was his child, and he was worried about the organization noticing this child. Not only that, but the CCG would pursue it, so he replaced the owl as the false owl, pretending to be this unbeatable monster that the CCG wanted to destroy. It's undeniable that Yoshimura has brought so much evil to the world, and he truly loathes himself for it. The way he seems to cope with this is to find whatever kind of solace he possibly can, which is why he's extremely passive throughout the entire story up until the very end, where he believes it's time for himself to atone. It's heartbreaking to think about, but I believe this passive behavior was never the best course of action he could have taken, and I'm sure that he's well aware of this as well. He did not visit Eto a single time after abandoning her. Of course, this was to protect her from his perspective, but it still messed up Eto's head bad. Now, please understand this before we really dive into his character. When it comes to Yoshimura, it's always morally gray. The ending of Tokyo Ghoul would make this blatantly clear, as he's shown in front of a scale as Kaneki speaks about placing the options on the scale, all the while hesitating. It's quite clear that Kuzen has always been a character who struggled with choice and decision making, and can you really blame him? He may have chosen to not visit Eto due to being in fear of V-tailing him or something. I mean, it's reasonable, but him choosing to not see Eto at least once did result in him hurting in the person he loved most in the world and causing her to believe that she was nothing more than an afterthought to him. The amount of hate he holds toward himself can also play a role into this. Maybe he didn't feel as if he was worthy of going out and pursuing her, but he certainly wanted to see her, as Kaneki would point out that he had a cup that was never used in his cabinet for as long as Kaneki could remember. He had always been waiting for her to come back to Anteku, and he even created the shop for that sole purpose. He simply sat there and waited until it was too late. Yoshimura's ability to wallow in his own self-pity is something that is not noticed by many, but I'm telling you, it's one of a kind. Remember, Yoshimura had found love with Ukina due to his loneliness and nothing else. She simply filled a hole in his heart that nothing else could. I'm not saying he didn't love Ukina, but he seems to revolve his life around himself, and despite his selfless actions, he picks and chooses when to make a point or when to play hero. You can see this now. He chooses to confront Arima to save Yomo, but again, fears V and wouldn't make any moves to save Eto, as he more than likely believed that due to their history, Eto should be the one to make contact with Yoshimura. And with Arima, he didn't know that Arima was a secret double agent or anything like that, so it didn't make sense to me there. When it comes to his goal of bridging humanity and ghouls, he asked Kaneki to do it. When it comes to saving Eto from herself, nah, Kaneki's got this, although all they know about each other is that they're both one-eyed ghouls. This is also why Kaneki questioning Eto as to why he should feel obligated to save trash such as herself is a profound moment for his character. Despite people thinking it's supposed to be some badass return to the story quote, it's really him rejecting the burden that Yoshimura has attempted to push onto him. I think Yoshimura's behavior is why Ishida chose to get rid of him as soon as Kaneki made the decision to go back to Anteku once more. He had simply outgrown Yoshimura as a mentor, and it was time for him to move on to Arima if he was going to progress the overarching story. I also believe this because Yoshimura is a parallel to the white-haired Kaneki full of anger. They both made a lot of their decisions only to stave off their loneliness, and were on a warpath against an entirely irrelevant enemy, making no progress throughout both of their stories. That's a key part of the tragedy of Tokyo Ghoul. It's the heartbreaking truth that Kaneki's rage-filled pursuit toward the One-Eyed King and Yoshimura's final stand against the CCG were pointless, displayed with the clown simply laughing at the demise of Kaneki at the very end of the story. Even more tragic when you realize that Furuta had been watching over Anteku the whole time. He led them all like sheep to their own destruction. Despite all the things I say about Yoshimura, remember that he still did as much good as he possibly believed that he could, and I think considering things from his perspective is important. And this isn't to absolve Eto of her own faults as well. There was never a single thing stopping her from going back to Yoshimura. But this video's not about her. This allows me to circle back to my original point of Yoshimura's decision making and ask you again. Did Yoshimura really have to live within the birdcage and abandon his daughter and hide in Anteku forever? To this, I say that Ishida constantly hammers into the reader's heads the importance of making a decision throughout this story, and punishes those who refuses. Despite doing all he did for the people around him, Yoshimura was only obligated to save one person in this world, and he couldn't do it. He was even very negligent in this goal. I think this is why, despite however you may feel about Eto, she accomplished much more in the entire world, being the one to springboard Kaneki into taking his first steps in destroying the birdcage that traps them all. I mean, she did dedicate her entire life toward a singular goal and constantly moved forward toward it, unlike her father who remained quite complacent and just waited for his problems to be fixed. I do believe that despite the complacency and flaws that Yoshimura displays, he did the best he could according to his own principles and the weight on his back, meanwhile giving Kaneki a positive outlook on himself and guiding him to become a pretty strong and capable man. Not only this, he chose to protect Eto by sacrificing his life and his life's work. I kind of think that's the entire purpose of his role in the final arc anyway. Anteku represented himself and everything he loved, so when it was going to be destroyed, part of the reasoning of the fighting came from the fact that he just didn't want to give up on that. The place that was made for his family to finally reunite, the place that represents all the good and bad in his life, and most importantly his guilt. Despite what Renji says about him sacrificing himself and choosing to atone for his sins, he didn't really need to do so. They all knew the raid was coming way ahead of time and could have just left. It simply wasn't required. If anything, Ishida is vehemently against this behavior in the story and will punish those who partake in self-sacrifice every single time. As we see with Yoshimura and the other two who chose to defend everyone by throwing away their lives, their fights achieved nothing, broke the hearts of everyone else, and they couldn't even manage to die. If it wasn't obvious enough, Kaneki's entire round 2 with Arima is supposed to reinforce this specific point. This mentality is something not to be adopted, as noble as it may seem, but rather overcome. To me, Yoshimura is a character with endless nuance that I've always felt genuine sorrow for. A man who was hurt and shaped by the world that didn't give his kind much chance and kind of ended up being trapped within his own birdcage that is Anteku. Despite his wisdom, a lot of hurt came along with it, and this hurt ends up driving a lot of his actions, leading up to his permanent brain dead state. It's truly tragic. With that said, I hope you guys enjoyed this little mini analysis on Yoshimura, and I'll catch you on the next one. Peace.